They told me for years there was no money in podcasting. Well, they were all wrong. For your personal brands, tackling social media was a little bit of a challenge. Is that easy to say? But that's interesting because that was your job for NASDAQ. You're on the social team. Social media, like branding is what you do, strategist. It's in your title. So how is it difficult from doing it from a brand perspective, from like a NASDAQ or a Google or what have you, to a personal brand where it's like, okay, this is me, this is my own thing where I'm in complete control. Talk to me about how like the working for like a corporate prepared you for doing it personally for your own brand, and how is this completely different?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's definitely nuggets that carry through, but it's essentially putting you under a microscope. And so putting me under a microscope is not something that I had ever done. And also, like, I spent most of my time in New York just trying to get my footing beneath me personally for my personal brand. So I never put myself under the microscope that I would put a company under, right? Because when you're trying to craft the social narrative for a company, first of all, like a journalist, you tackle the who, what, when, where, why. Like, who are the players? What do they care about? Why should they care about this? When should we be posting, right? When is your audience on? And you're tackling all of those big questions, but you're not used to turning yourself into the subject, right? This is why successful business owners hire coaches. This is why they hire things that, yes, ideally, maybe they would be perfectly equipped to do, but it's like, even the manager needs management. And so that's something that some people decide to outsource. When you're strappy, you have to kind of do it yourself sometimes, right? And so I had to take a different approach to my own social media. And I realized that it's going to be evolving for a bit. Like, even now, I'm still figuring out like what my personal branding is for Moneda versus myself. Like, I think Moneda was much more clear. The branding for the podcast was much more clear. But when people are like, oh, well, who's Lyanne? That was a little more complicated because I had my persona at NASDAQ that a lot of people knew because I was doing on-camera stuff, as you recall, and I was interviewing founders, and it kind of put me on the grid in a certain kind of way. And so people were like, wait, you're like the host on NASDAQ. And they were like, oh, wait, but you're also the host about this Latino podcast and you freelance. Also, I freelanced. I would freelance for like these magazines, like Yahoo Finance, and before then I wrote for Business Insider and NBC Latino. So occasionally I pitch my story. So I had different personas, and putting myself under that microscope, I just hadn't done that before because all I'd been focused since going to New York was just building my career. And I was like, okay, I want to do that. That seems cool. That seems cool. That seems cool. But when you're looking at a company, you're very specific. You're like, what's your messaging? Let's stick to that messaging. Who are you trying to target? Let's stick to that target audience. And like, honestly, a human, we tend to say like, we want to humanize the company, but a human is not a company, you know, like I did a lot of different things in New York, like, and I think this is the kind of thing that we're coming to realization to with the pandemic, kind of like just reaching a bottleneck and exploding point, right? Is that we're like multi-hyphenate people. Like we can be more than one thing. For a while on my personal social media, I was sharing a lot of NASDAQ stuff. And so people came to know me as the NASDAQ woman, the NASDAQ reporter. But that was only one of my multifaceted things. I was also a freelancer. I was a Moneda Moves podcast host. I was also advocating for journalists of color. So, you know, like, I think that like were other things going on in the background that made it much more complicated to figure out, how do I want to position myself on social media? And it's honestly something that to this day I continue questioning. And I think it's a good thing. Definitely. Because people are fluid. Companies, they settle more into their strategy. Like even when you go public on NASDAQ, you can't be changing every 2 months. Maybe like, yes, you tweak, you're always making improvements, but you can't shift your entire messaging. People need a narrative to hang on to, and they need to be able to follow the storyline. Like humans don't really work that way, but with big influencers, I'm sure that they do. And so I think that that's just something that I needed to like reframe for myself and figure out, okay, how do I want to position my podcast and how do I want to contextualize myself?